They all heard the shouting before they saw him hurl the divorce papers across the dining table. The papers slid toward her with a loud scraping sound, and the guests froze. The chandelier above them flickered, as though it sensed the tension. No one dared to speak. He stood at the head of the table, his face cold and twisted with scorn. His dark suit made him look taller and more imposing. In that moment, it seemed like he held the entire room in the palm of his hand. She stared at the papers. The thick stack, printed in crisp black letters, felt more like a slab of stone than a simple set of documents. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She had seen many forms of cruelty in her life, but this was new, and it stung. The people around them as friends, her so-called relatives by marriage, and various onlookers watched with shock. Some were biting their lips, trying not to gasp. Some had a gleam in their eyes, as if they had expected this outcome from the start. His voice cut the silence. Sign them. He looked at her as if she were a stranger. His eyes did not hold any warmth. Instead, they carried a cold certainty that he was the one in control. Underneath that certainty was something even harsher. A deep belief that she was not worthy of his time, his love, or his kindness. She was supposed to cry. She was supposed to beg him to stay, to reconsider. She was supposed to crumble in front of his power. She said nothing. The only thing she did was take a slow breath, hold back the tears, and wonder how they had reached this point. All her life, she had faced people who doubted her worth. But she never imagined her own husband, the man who once claimed to love her, would stand in front of the people he knew best and show such contempt. She felt smaller in that room than she had ever felt before. A kind of hush fell over the space. Each second stretched into something heavier. Would she drop to her knees? Would she wail? Would she beg him for mercy? Everyone waited, and that was the darkest moment of all. 5 years earlier, they had married in a grand ceremony. Not because she wanted something fancy, but because he insisted. He was a billionaire, after all. His name was Thomas Givens, and he was one of the richest men in the country. People said he was charming, smart, and unstoppable. They never mentioned his pride or his temper when describing him. His wealth shone so bright that many stayed blind to his faults. Her name was Althea. She had grown up in a small town where she and her mother lived in a tiny apartment. She had no siblings. Her father was never part of her life, and her mother's health was fragile. Althea had learned to survive on very little. She worked odd jobs to pay for her mother's medicine. She studied hard in school when she could, but she had no illusions about her future. Being a black girl in a place where opportunities were scarce, she had known challenges. She had faced subtle racism daily, from teachers who doubted her abilities to shop owners who watched her with suspicion. When she first met Thomas, she was working at an upscale restaurant as a busser. He was there for a business dinner. She remembered the way he laughed at some joke a colleague told, how he exuded confidence. Everyone at his table seemed to orbit around him like he was the sun, and they were tiny planets. Althea had spilled water on his table by accident that night. She expected him to yell, to demand she be fired on the spot, but he only flashed a grin, told her it was all right, and slipped her $100 tip. She had never seen that much money in her life. Later, Thomas found her in a corner of the restaurant, tears in her eyes. She was embarrassed by her mistake, by the attention, by the realization that she was out of place in this world of wealth. He took out another bill and pressed it into her hand, telling her to get something for herself and her mother. Then, with that same confident smile, he asked if she would like to join him for coffee someday. She said yes, unsure of her own voice. That was the start of their story. Their first few dates felt like a dream. She could not believe this wealthy, powerful man wanted to spend time with her. He took her to fancy restaurants, museums, and shopping malls that she had only seen on billboards. She found herself torn between excitement at the new sights and a nagging feeling of not belonging. She felt the stares from some of the staff. She felt their silent question, "What is she doing with him?" But Thomas always brushed those moments aside. "Ignore them," he would say. "You're with me now. They have no idea who you are." He would hold her hand, and for a moment, she would feel safe. She started to let down her guard, believing that maybe this was how her life was meant to turn out. Maybe love had finally found her, even if it came from a different world. When Thomas asked her to marry him, she was speechless. They had known each other for only 6 months. Her mother was still unwell, and Althea worried about the cost of hospital bills. Part of her felt wary of stepping into such a big commitment with a man she still barely knew. But he looked sincere when he held out that ring with the giant diamond. He promised to support her, protect her, and help care for her mother. "I love you," he said. And the way he said it made her heart flutter. She looked at that ring, bigger than anything she ever imagined wearing, and felt both fear and hope dancing inside her. In that moment, she chose to hope. She nodded through her tears, said yes, and let him slip the ring onto her finger. They had a lavish wedding at a grand estate overlooking a lake. Her mother was too ill to attend, but Althea's closest friends from her hometown came. Many of Thomas's guests were from the world of luxury, corporate partners, famous celebrities, and extended family who wore designer clothes and chatted about million-dollar deals. Althea felt lost in the crowd, but when Thomas put his arm around her, she reminded herself that this was her life now. She promised herself she would make him proud. She would be a good wife, no matter what it took. The first year of marriage was calm, at least on the surface. They settled into a sprawling penthouse in the city. She tried her best to decorate it in a way that felt warm and welcoming. Thomas seemed to enjoy her presence, and he made sure she had everything she needed. He gave her a credit card and told her she never had to ask for permission to buy anything. When her mother's health grew worse, he arranged for a private nurse and paid all the medical bills. Althea found ways to express her gratitude. She cooked him breakfast every morning, learned his favorite foods, and waited up for him at night when he returned from long business meetings. She was always polite, always thankful. She felt a duty to show him she was worthy of his kindness, but she also began noticing things that made her uneasy. He rarely introduced her to his inner circle. If there was a big event at his company, he found reasons for her not to come. He said he was protecting her from the harsh spotlight. There are a lot of snobs in high society, he told her. They will say awful things. She did not fight him on it. A small part of her was relieved not to face those eyes that judged her. Still, she felt a pang each time he shut her out. He wanted her close, but not too close. He gave her plenty of material comfort, but also built invisible walls that she could not break down. The first real argument happened at a charity gala. It was the first time Thomas agreed to bring her. Althea wore a simple black gown and spent hours on her hair and makeup, determined to look the part of a billionaire's wife. When they arrived, people stared. She felt every pair of eyes on her brown skin, on the curls in her hair. She felt people sizing her up, whispering behind half-hidden smiles. She tried to stand tall, offering polite greetings, but she saw how many looked at Thomas, then back at her, and made quiet remarks. The highlight of the night was when an older woman, who turned out to be Thomas's aunt, approached and said in a patronizing voice, "You must be so grateful to my nephew for saving you from your sad life. You really should try to fit in better." Althea's face burned, but she forced a smile. Before she could respond, Thomas pulled his aunt aside. She expected him to defend her, to tell his aunt that her words were hurtful. Instead, Althea overheard him laugh with his aunt in a low voice. She heard the words, "Don't worry, she'll learn." She felt a crack in her heart at that moment. On the ride home, she asked him why he had not stood up for her. He responded that she was being sensitive, that she did not understand how these social circles worked. "She didn't mean any harm," he said, brushing it off. "Do you want me to start a feud with my own family?" Althea felt tears threaten to fall, but she held them back. She looked out the window and stayed silent. Life carried on. Althea kept quiet about her hurts and kept trying to be the good wife. She spent her days reading, writing in her journal, and visiting her mother. Thomas threw himself into his empire, traveling often and making deals. When he was home, he was polite but distant. He offered no real conversation, no real intimacy. It was as though he considered her a trophy, something to display when convenient but not a true partner. Even so, Althea told herself she should be grateful. Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a moment to say a huge thank you for helping us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to me, and I'm incredibly grateful for every like, comment, and share. This is only the beginning. Let's keep growing this amazing community together, so if you haven't already, please subscribe, drop a like, and leave a comment. Thank you once again for all the love and support. She was not working 3 jobs anymore. Her mother was getting top-quality medical care. She lived in a beautiful penthouse and had plenty of money to shop for clothes or household items. Did she really have the right to complain? That question nagged at her, especially when a news segment would come on showing stories about people facing discrimination and poverty. She felt empathy for them, especially when they were black women like her. But she also felt a strange sense of guilt that she was now removed from those struggles. She wanted to do more. She shared her thoughts with Thomas once, suggesting they start a program to support underprivileged black students or something similar. He was dismissive. "I donate to various causes," he said. "But there's no need to focus on race. People can help themselves if they work hard. I did. Everyone else can too. Althea did not see the point in pushing further. She knew that behind his polished facade, he believed that his success was proof that anyone could succeed. He never wanted to look deeper into systems of inequality or question how his own privilege helped him along the way. And so Althea found other ways to help quietly. She donated a portion of her allowance to small charities that served Black communities. She volunteered at a local shelter once a week, not telling Thomas. She formed friendships with some of the older ladies in that shelter who gave her advice and listened to her problems without judgment. Over time, the cracks in her marriage began to widen. She could sense Thomas growing colder, especially when she tried to share any opinion that clashed with his. He would tell her she was naive, that she did not understand business or society. It was not always about race either. Sometimes he simply thought she was less intelligent. He would laugh at her attempts to learn about investing. He would make offhand comments about how someone like her could never grasp complex financial strategies. When she asked if she could go back to college and finish her degree, she had taken community college classes before they met. Thomas shrugged. "You're free to do what you want," he said, "but I don't see the point. You have everything you need here." There was no real encouragement. Still, she applied to an online program to at least continue learning. It made her feel like she had some control over her life. Meanwhile, her mother's condition stayed the same. The doctor said they were doing all they could. Althea spent hours by her mother's bedside. Her mother sometimes whispered her worries that Althea looked sad, that something was not right at home. Althea always responded that everything was fine. She could not bring herself to tell the truth. She wanted to protect her mother from worry. In quiet moments, Althea found herself feeling lonely. She had a huge penthouse but no one to talk to. She would eat dinner alone while Thomas stayed at the office or traveled. Sometimes days passed without them speaking more than a few sentences. She did not even have many friends in the city. The old ones back home seemed distant, as if they no longer recognized her life. The high society women Thomas introduced her to were polite but not warm. She always felt out of place. One afternoon, Althea came across a photo album from the wedding. She flipped through the pages, looking at pictures of them smiling, cutting the enormous cake, dancing under the fairy lights. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes. Thomas looked proud and strong, holding her as if he cherished her. Althea remembered the hope she felt on that day, the sense that she was stepping into a life filled with possibilities. She closed the album, tears forming in her eyes. She wanted that hope back. She wanted to believe there was still love between them. She decided she would speak to Thomas about her feelings, about what she needed. She would ask him to attend counseling with her or at least sit down and talk honestly. That evening, she prepared a nice dinner: roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes, and grilled vegetables. She set out candles, hoping for a warm atmosphere. Thomas arrived home, clearly stressed from work. He tossed his coat on the couch and loosened his tie. He barely noticed the candles or the smell of food. Althea tried to give him a hug, but he sighed and moved past her to the dining table. They ate in silence for a bit. Then she mustered the courage to say she wanted to have a serious conversation. She talked about feeling lonely, about wanting to be closer to him, about her fears that their marriage was falling apart. Thomas listened, his jaw clenched. When she finished, he set down his fork and said, "Are you done?" She nodded slowly, her eyes welling up. He shook his head. "I've had a tough day. I don't need this right now." She asked if they could talk another time. He told her he was too busy. She wanted to tell him she loved him, that she missed him. Instead, she watched as he got up from the table, left his half-eaten dinner, and walked away. Later that night, she lay awake in bed, tears slipping onto the pillow. He was asleep beside her, or at least pretending to be, his back turned. It was a cold reminder of how far they had drifted. More and more, Thomas returned home, late or left early. Althea only heard of his achievements from the news or from employees who praised him. He had become a financial giant, known for buying out struggling companies and turning them into gold mines. But while his reputation soared in business, the man at home grew harsher. He spoke to Althea in sharp tones if she asked questions. If she tried to show him something she wrote or learned in her classes, he dismissed it. She once overheard him speaking on the phone to a colleague saying, "I should have married someone who matched me better. This was a mistake." Those words sliced through her like knives. She left the room before he caught her listening. That night, she stood on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the city lights. She wondered how love could fade so fast, or if it had been an illusion all along. Even worse, she began to notice how he treated her around his wealthy, mostly white colleagues. He never outright insulted her, but he made jokes about her background or her small-town ways. He made comments about how she had good genes for a black girl. which she found insulting and humiliating. More than once, she heard him tell someone that she had been lucky to marry up. It was a subtle form of racism that stabbed at her self-respect. She realized that despite her being his wife, he viewed her as lesser. He saw her as some kind of project that he had generously saved. Althea's heart ached with the weight of it all. She wanted to believe there was still good in him. After all, he had once been kind to her. He had shown her a world she never knew. But every day, those memories felt more like a mirage. She wondered if she was the only one fighting for this marriage. Then again, was it even worth fighting for if he saw her as inferior? When Althea's mother took a turn for the worse, she needed to spend more time at the hospital. Thomas gave her a driver and told her to do what she must, but he did not come to the hospital often. He claimed work was too demanding. Althea would sit by her mother's bed, telling her stories of better days. Her mother would stroke her hand, looking worried. She asked if Thomas treated her well. Althea forced a smile and said yes. She did not want her mother's last days to be filled with sorrow. One night, her mother's condition became critical. Althea called Thomas, her voice shaking, asking if he could come say goodbye. He told her he was in the middle of a major deal. He said she should call him when she had an update. Althea felt her chest tighten. She realized that whatever love Thomas once had for her or for her family was gone, or maybe it had never been there. In that moment, she stopped hoping he would change. She stayed with her mother through the night. In the early hours, her mother opened her eyes and whispered, "You deserve better, baby. Don't let anyone make you feel small." Then her mother slipped away quietly, her hand still in Althea's. That moment was a turning point for Althea. She felt pain, deep and raw, but also a flicker of resolve. Her mother's last words rang in her mind, urging her not to accept a life without dignity. The funeral was small, attended mostly by neighbors from her hometown. Thomas made a brief appearance, standing stiffly in a dark suit. He offered his condolences to the guests, but he left right after the short service. Althea saw him glance at his watch more than once, as if this was an unwanted delay in his busy schedule. She felt a mix of anger and sadness. The man who once seemed to care about her now acted like she was merely an obligation. After the funeral, Althea stayed a few more days in her hometown. She visited old friends and found comfort in their warm embraces. She thought back to the time she and her mother struggled with rent or groceries, how her mother always believed in her. She decided then that she would not live as a caged bird in Thomas's penthouse anymore. She did not know exactly what she would do, but she vowed to find a way out of this painful existence. When she returned to the city, she tried to speak with Thomas again. She told him she needed change. She wanted to get a job, do something meaningful, maybe continue her education in a more serious capacity. He looked at her as if she were speaking another language. "Why would you need a job?" he asked. "I'm giving you everything. What more do you want?" She explained that she needed purpose. She needed to feel like her life belonged to her, not just be some decoration in his world. He dismissed her. "That's nonsense," he said. "If you're bored, do some charity work. But don't interfere with my business or my life. I'm under too much pressure to worry about your sudden cravings for independence." She felt a deep frustration build inside her, but she forced herself to remain calm. She realized if she tried to argue, he would shut her down. So she stayed silent and left the room, her mind racing with a plan she had begun to form. Without telling Thomas, Althea started researching job opportunities. She knew her resume was thin, but she also knew she had lived experiences, had compassion, and was a quick learner. She applied for entry-level positions at local nonprofits, hoping to find a place that matched her desire to help others. After a few interviews, a community center that focused on mentoring youth called her back. They needed someone for administrative tasks, youth program support, and general office help. The pay was modest, but that did not matter. She accepted the offer with a grateful heart. Each morning, she rose early, left the penthouse before Thomas woke, if he was even there, and headed to the community center. It was a lively place, filled with children running around, older volunteers organizing events, and staff who worked tirelessly to keep the programs going. Althea felt a sense of belonging for the first time in a long while. These people welcomed her, not for her husband's money, but for her willingness to help. She made friends with coworkers who admired her dedication. She stayed late, brainstorming ways to improve outreach to the Black community, especially girls who felt overlooked in the school system. She shared her story with a few trusted mentors, who encouraged her to never doubt her worth. It was like she had found a family she never knew she needed. Of course, Thomas eventually found out. One evening he came home early, expecting to see her. Instead, he found an empty penthouse and dinner not ready. He waited impatiently, growing angry as the hours passed. When Althea walked in at last, carrying some folders from work, he confronted her. "Where have you been? Why didn't you tell me you'd be out?" "I was working," she replied simply, trying to stay calm. "Working where?" he demanded. She told him about the community center. His face twisted with disbelief, then anger. "You think a job like that is worthy of my wife? I married you so you'd never have to waste your time with that nonsense. Why can't you be grateful?" Althea told him it was not about money. It was about doing something meaningful. She tried to explain how much this work mattered to her. But he shot back. "Meaningful? You're just dealing with a bunch of kids who have no future. You belong here with me in this home, not out there in a low-level job." That was the first time Althea felt real fury toward him. She looked him in the eye and said, "Those kids have just as much right to a future as anyone else. I won't let you talk about them like that." Thomas stared at her, stunned by her sudden boldness. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, without another word, he walked away, leaving her in the silent living room. After that fight, Thomas's attitude worsened. He barely spoke to her. When he did, it was to belittle her job or her coworkers. Althea avoided him as much as she could, focusing on her work at the community center. She found joy in helping the kids, guiding them with homework, planning events, and listening to their stories. Some of them came from broken homes. Others faced racism every day at school. Althea felt a personal connection, remembering her own struggles. She became a mentor to several teenage girls who looked up to her. Seeing their growth made her think more deeply about her own life. Here she was, in a marriage where she was disrespected, where her identity was reduced to a worthless tag-along. She felt a stirring in her soul that she could not ignore. Maybe it was the last words of her mother reminding her of her worth. Maybe it was the resilience she saw in the young people at the center. Whatever it was, she felt stronger than she ever had. She started setting aside her own money. Although her paycheck was small, she carefully saved a portion. She considered leaving Thomas, but fear held her back. What if he cut her off financially and she ended up with nothing? What if he tried to punish her? He had the money, the lawyers, and the power. She knew he was not above cruelty. But she also knew she could not continue living this way. She waited, hoping for a sign or an opportunity. That opportunity came in an unexpected form. One day, the community center's director told Althea that a large company was interested in donating funds. They had heard about the work the center did with at-risk youth. Althea was overjoyed, thinking this meant new programs, more equipment, and better facilities. She was assigned to help prepare the presentation for the potential donors. On the day of the meeting, Althea walked into a conference room at the office building they had been invited to. She carried a folder of documents and a hopeful heart. But when the door opened and she saw the team of donors, her breath caught in her throat. Sitting at the head of the table was Thomas. He was there with a few of his associates, apparently planning to donate a large sum. She had no idea he was behind this. It seemed he had not bothered to mention it to her. Thomas's expression when he saw her was a mix of surprise and annoyance. Althea stepped forward, introduced herself as the community center's coordinator, and began to explain their programs. Thomas looked like he wanted to speak, but she kept going, her voice steady. She ignored his piercing stare, focusing on the slides and handouts. She described how the center helped kids find hope, how it offered tutoring, counseling, and safe spaces. She spoke about the dreams of those children, how some wanted to become doctors, teachers, and business owners if given the chance. Her passion was clear. At the end of her presentation, another donor asked questions, and she answered confidently. Thomas never spoke a word throughout. When the meeting concluded, the donors applauded politely. Thomas finally stood up, eyeing her with a cold glance. "I'll be in touch," he said flatly. Then he turned and left with his group. Althea's heart pounded in her chest. She felt a mix of victory and dread. She had held her own in front of him and his associates, but she feared what might follow. When she arrived home that night, she found Thomas seated in the living room, sipping whiskey. He looked at her with disdain. "So that's what you've been doing with your time? Trying to make me look like a fool in front of my associates?" She set her bag down, feeling a spike of anger. "I was just doing my job. I had no idea your company was involved. Why didn't you tell me?" He scoffed, swirling the drink in his glass. "Because I didn't see the point. But now you made me look like I can't even control my own wife. They were all impressed with you, as if you're some noble activist. You should have left that to the staff in charge of marketing or fundraising, not placed yourself front and center like you're a hero." Althea stood firm. I am on staff. I handle the programs every day, and I was asked to present. I don't see what's wrong with that. Thomas set his glass down hard. What's wrong is that you're embarrassing me. You're supposed to be at home, not parading around as some savior of underprivileged kids. I gave you everything. I took you from a place of poverty, and this is how you repay me? By showing me up in a meeting? She felt her cheeks burn with anger. You're the one who acts like I should be grateful to the point of losing my own self. I'm not property you can just showcase or hide. That was when he snapped. His face twisted, and he threw the empty glass against the wall. It shattered, whiskey splattering. Althea jumped back, fear rushing through her body. Thomas took a step forward, raising his arm as if he might grab her. But he froze, eyes burning with rage, then lowered his hand. You'll regret this, he said in a low voice before storming out of the penthouse. In the days that followed, Thomas stayed away. He did not come home, and Althea was almost glad for the silence. But her mind raced. She knew this was not over. Thomas was a man who hated feeling humiliated or out of control. She worried about what he might do next. To protect herself, she began gathering important documents: her birth certificate, old financial statements, her marriage license. She kept them in a hidden folder in her closet. She also moved some of her small savings to a separate account that Thomas did not know about. She confided in her boss at the community center, who advised her to be careful. They pointed her to a few legal resources in case she needed them. Althea considered filing for separation, but she felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Part of her still remembered the kindness he once showed. A very small part of her hoped he might realize his wrongdoing and change. She also dreaded the fallout. If she left him, would he punish her by withdrawing any funding he planned to give the center? Would he use his power to make it impossible for her to keep her job? A week later, Thomas reappeared. He came home late one night, reeking of alcohol, and passed out in the guest bedroom. Althea watched him from the doorway, thinking how far they had come from that first day they met in the restaurant. She felt no warmth toward him. She felt pity for both of them. The next morning, she left for work without trying to speak to him. When she came back that evening, she found him waiting in the living room once again. Only this time, he was not alone. Two lawyers stood by his side, their expressions stern. On the coffee table lay a set of papers. Althea froze, her stomach dropping. She recognized the heading at once. Divorce. Thomas's eyes flickered with a cold satisfaction. He nodded at one of the lawyers, who stepped forward and handed her the documents. They looked thick and official, with many pages filled with legal jargon. Althea's hand trembled slightly as she took them. She looked up at Thomas, her expression unreadable. He did not speak at first, letting the silence sink in. Then he said in a smooth, arrogant tone, "Sign them. Let's make this quick and painless." She glanced at the papers, noticing how they left her almost nothing. There was a small sum of money, not enough to live on for more than a few months, considering the cost of rent in the city. The penthouse, the cars, the expensive everything remained his. There was no mention of spousal support that could sustain her in the long run. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "This is what you want?" she asked quietly. He smirked. "It's best for both of us. You go on your way, and I keep what's mine. I'm sure you can find another job doing your community work." The lawyers exchanged glances, waiting for her reaction. Althea turned each page, skimming the cruel terms. She saw how little he thought of her, how easy he thought it would be for her to crawl away and vanish from his life. She remembered how he once said he loved her, how he once promised to take care of her. And here he was now, discarding her like an old piece of furniture. But it was not just about the money. It was about the lack of respect, the racism, the abuse, and the belittling. She thought about the children at the community center who fought each day for dignity. She thought about her mother, who had told her not to let anyone make her feel small. With a slow, deep breath, she looked at Thomas and said, "I won't sign this." A flicker of anger crossed his face. The lawyers remained silent. Thomas stiffened. "If you don't sign, I'll drag you through court. It will be expensive. It will be public. Trust me, you don't want that." Althea held his gaze. Her voice was calm, but her heart was racing. "Then drag me through court." Thomas exploded. He yelled that she was ungrateful, that he had saved her from a life of poverty. He threatened to smear her name, to tell the world she was a gold digger who manipulated him. The lawyers tried to calm him, but he waved them off. "You have no power," he spat at Althea. "I can destroy you." She stood there, feeling her hands tremble. But she was not a helpless girl anymore. She had found her passion, her voice. She had seen too much to be scared into submission. "Do what you have to do," she said. "I'm not signing away my life on your terms." Thomas pointed a finger at her, fury in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he repeated, before stomping out of the penthouse, the lawyers trailing behind him. Althea sank into a chair, taking in what had just happened. She stared at the divorce papers. Her hands shook, but she felt a surge of resolve. She refused to let him bully her. She would find a way to stand up for herself, even if it meant facing him in court. Her mother's words rang in her ears once more. "You deserve better." She whispered to herself, "Yes, I do." In the following weeks, Thomas's threats became real. She received notices from a high-powered legal firm, warning her that if she did not sign, they would file motions to limit any possible settlement. They would also drag up her past, painting her as a woman who used Thomas for money. She began to see negative stories appear in gossip columns, suggesting she had married him for his bank account. Some stories hinted that she had cheated on him, which was completely false. She felt sick reading them, but she tried not to let them break her. She sought out a lawyer recommended by one of her co-workers. This lawyer, Sharon, specialized in family law and had experience defending women who faced powerful spouses. Sharon was kind but firm. She explained that it would not be easy. Thomas had an army of legal experts and unlimited funds. However, Sharon believed Althea had a strong case, given the emotional abuse and the attempts to leave her with nothing. "Don't give up," Sharon said. "We'll fight this." Althea continued working at the community center. She found strength there. Her boss reassured her that they would stand by her. The kids asked why she looked tired, and she just smiled gently, saying she was dealing with grown-up problems. Some of her teenage mentees guessed something was wrong and offered her hugs, telling her she was an inspiration. Those simple gestures fueled her will to fight on. She thought about how many women face similar situations without resources or support. She decided she would not hide or run. She would stand up for herself no matter how daunting it seemed. Thomas was confident that, under enough pressure, Althea would bend. He believed she was still that timid girl from a poor background who would do anything to avoid conflict. But the more he pushed, the more she pushed back. Through Sharon, Althea filed a countersuit, detailing the emotional abuse, the racist comments, the controlling behavior. She requested a fair division of the assets acquired during the marriage. She did not ask for half his fortune, but she did demand enough to rebuild her life properly. When the media got wind of the messy divorce, it became a hot topic. Some outlets sympathized with Althea, calling attention to the racial and social power imbalance. Others sided with Thomas, painting him as a generous man who married a woman beneath his status. Comment sections online were filled with debate. Althea tried not to read them, but it was hard to avoid. She saw everything from words of support to nasty insults about her race. At the center, her boss told her to take leave if she needed. But Althea refused. She needed to keep working, to keep her mind focused on what mattered. Every day, she saw kids who faced hardships far worse than hers. She found courage in their resilience. She would tell them stories about famous Black leaders, about people who overcame obstacles. She told them, "You must never let anyone define your worth." She realized she was also talking to herself. The pretrial hearings were tense. Thomas arrived with his team of lawyers, wearing an expensive suit and a smug expression. Althea sat beside Sharon, feeling her palms sweat. The judge listened to both sides lay out the basic facts. Thomas's lawyers portrayed Althea as someone who contributed nothing to the marriage. They tried to tear down her character, citing her humble background and lack of higher education. They claimed she was only after his money. But Sharon presented evidence of Althea's volunteer work, her job at the community center, and her mother's medical bills, all of which Thomas had once agreed to pay. She showed texts and emails where Thomas belittled Althea, referencing her race and her lack of sophistication. It was painful for Althea to hear those words repeated in court. But it also showed the judge that Thomas's behavior was not as pristine as he wanted everyone to believe. Thomas glared at Althea across the courtroom, as if silently warning her to back down. But she held her head up. She had come too far to submit now. At the end of the hearing, the judge set a date for the actual trial. Both sides were told to gather more evidence and be prepared. Thomas's lawyers tried to push for a swift decision in his favor. The judge declined, saying that the issues were too complex to rush. Althea left the courthouse feeling drained but also strangely proud. She had not crumbled under the weight of his threats. She had faced him, and she was still standing. She did not know how things would end, But she knew she was fighting for something larger than just money. She was fighting for her dignity. Weeks passed as they prepared for the trial. Althea was told that Thomas wanted to settle out of court if she agreed to a small sum and a confidentiality clause. She refused. She would not let him buy her silence. Each day, she discovered more about his tactics. Reporters would show up near the community center, hurling questions about their marriage. Thomas's lawyers would send new demands, trying to intimidate her. Sharon urged her to hold firm and reminded her that many powerful men use such bullying tactics. Meanwhile, word spread around the community center about what Althea was going through. One of the local news stations reached out to her directly, wanting to hear her side. For a long time, she was unsure whether to speak. She did not want to become a spectacle. But then she thought about all the women who needed to see someone stand up to a powerful abuser and not cave. She agreed to a short interview, keeping her statements general but honest. She spoke about how money could not buy love or respect, and how racism and arrogance had torn her marriage apart. Thomas's reaction was swift. He used his influence to pressure the station, trying to get the interview pulled. But it was too late. Clips appeared on social media, with many people praising Althea for her courage. Others attacked her, calling her a liar. She tried not to read the hateful comments. She focused on the positive responses, the messages from other women thanking her for telling the truth. One night, as the trial date approached, Althea received an unexpected phone call. It was from one of Thomas's distant cousins, a black woman named Regina, who had never openly talked to Althea before. Regina explained that she had always kept her distance from Thomas because of his attitude and the way his family looked down on her. She said she admired Althea's bravery. "Listen," Regina told her quietly. "I have some information that might help you. Thomas's father was involved in a scandal years ago, and it's tied to why Thomas treats black people the way he does. He tries to hide it, but I have documents that show some of the illegal practices in their company targeting black communities. If you want them, I'll send them." Althea's heart pounded. She did not fully understand what Regina had, but she sensed it was important. Regina emailed her several files. Althea forwarded them to Sharon, who looked them over and felt they could be used to show a pattern of discrimination. It might not directly relate to the divorce, but it added weight to the argument that Thomas's racism was deep-rooted. Sharon said, "This could also bring a lot of unwanted attention if we use it. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Althea thought about the risk. The information could spark a bigger scandal, but it would also shine a light on Thomas's family history of exploiting black communities. She took a moment before nodding. "I'm ready," she said. "He wanted a fight. He's got one." The trial began in a crowded courtroom. Reporters lined the halls, snapping pictures as Thomas strode in, flanked by his lawyers. Althea entered quietly with Sharon at her side, determined to keep her composure. The proceedings stretched over several days, with witnesses called and evidence presented. Thomas tried to appear calm and rational, painting himself as a generous man who was taken advantage of by a cunning woman. But when Sharon introduced emails and texts between Thomas and his close associates, the court saw how he mocked Althea's race and background. Jokes about her being from the ghetto, remarks about how he had rescued Herthy's messages were read aloud. Althea could barely look at him, feeling a wave of anger and sadness. She noticed some jury members react with disgust. Then came the documents Regina had provided. Sharon carefully explained how Thomas and his father had profited from predatory loans in black neighborhoods, contributing to financial ruin for many families. It was not the main focus of the divorce case, but it painted a picture of the man's willingness to exploit people he deemed beneath him. Thomas's lawyers objected, saying it was irrelevant, but the judge allowed a limited discussion, citing it as part of establishing his character and motives. Thomas's face reddened. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glaring at Althea and Sharon. The tension in the courtroom was thick. Althea felt her heart pounding. She had never imagined she would be in such a position, publicly exposing a billionaire's misdeeds, but she held firm. She was tired of living in fear. On the final day, both sides gave closing statements. Thomas's lawyers tried to spin the narrative one last time. Althea had come from nothing, latched onto Thomas for his money, and now wanted a big payout. They said she was the one who introduced race into this dispute to gain sympathy. They insisted Thomas treated her well and that she was simply ungrateful. Sharon countered with a calm but powerful statement. She highlighted the evidence of emotional abuse, racism, and manipulation. She pointed out that Althea had not asked for half of Thomas's fortune, only a fair settlement that recognized the 5 years she spent supporting him, giving up her own education, and tending to her mother with his promises. Sharon reminded the court that Althea had tried to make the marriage work, but Thomas's behavior showed a blatant disregard for her dignity. When Althea took the stand for her final testimony, she spoke from the heart. She explained how she met Thomas, how she believed in his kindness, and how over time she realized he saw her as inferior. She mentioned the subtle racism, the cold indifference to her mother's passing, and the way he mocked her work at the community center. She ended by saying, "I stand here because I deserve to be treated as an equal. No woman should be bullied and threatened when she chooses not to live in someone's shadow. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to reclaim my life." With that, the case was left in the hands of the judge. It took several days before the judge delivered the ruling. Althea tried to go about her routine at the community center, but her mind constantly drifted to the possible outcomes. She braced herself for the worst, knowing Thomas had endless resources. Still, she felt a strange calm. She had done all she could. No matter what happened, she had stood up for herself. Finally, the judge called them back. The courtroom was tense as the judge read out the findings. He cited Thomas's pattern of emotional harm and disrespect. He acknowledged the evidence of racism and how it played a role in the marital dynamics. In the end, he granted the divorce and ordered Thomas to provide a sizable settlement, one that would allow Althea to rebuild her life. It was not half of Thomas's empire, but it was far more than what Thomas's original offer had been. The judge also dismissed all of Thomas's allegations against Althea, stating there was no proof she had married him for money or cheated on him. Thomas stood rigidly, his face turning pale with fury. He looked like he wanted to scream, but he stayed silent. His lawyers quickly gathered around him, discussing next steps, possibly an appeal. Althea felt tears in her eyes. Not tears of joy for the money, but tears of relief that the court had seen the truth. She thanked Sharon, who gave her a warm smile and a reassuring nod. Reporters rushed to ask for Althea's reaction as she stepped outside. She took a moment before saying, "I'm thankful for justice. I hope my story helps others see that no one, no matter their background, should be treated as less than human." Then she walked away, ignoring the barrage of follow-up questions. News outlets exploded with headlines. "Billionaire loses divorce battle to wife he tried to discredit." "Racist messages exposed in court. Courageous wife stands up for herself." Althea's phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts, many from strangers thanking her for sharing her story. She felt overwhelmed, but also hopeful. She realized her fight was not just about her, but about speaking out against racism and abuse. She decided to set aside a large portion of the settlement to fund scholarships at the community center. She wanted to help those kids get the education they deserved. She also started considering how she could use her own life experiences to become a public advocate for women in abusive relationships. She was not sure if she was ready for that step, but she kept her options open. Thomas, on the other hand, faced scrutiny from the business world. Some of his partners distanced themselves, fearing public backlash. He gave a few interviews claiming the court had been unfair, but with the evidence presented, few believed him. Over time, his name stopped appearing in social circles as often, replaced by whispers about his downfall. He remained wealthy, but his reputation was tarnished. A month after the ruling, Althea moved out of the penthouse. She found a modest apartment in a friendly neighborhood near the community center. It felt like a fresh start. She decorated the small living room with photos of her mother and some of her own artwork. She set up a study area for her online classes, determined to finish her degree. On her first night in the new place, she felt a strange mixture of loneliness and freedom. She had no staff waiting on her, no high-end furniture around her. But she also had no one belittling her, no one telling her how worthless she was. She made herself a simple dinner of pasta and vegetables, sat on the small couch, and breathed in the quiet. It felt good. She kept working at the community center. The kids were thrilled to see her each day, as if she were a returning hero. They asked questions about the trial, and she kept her answers simple. "I stood up for myself, and now I'm okay." She realized how important it was for them to see a black woman who did not back down in the face of injustice. They needed that story, just as she once needed someone to show her it was possible. One afternoon, Althea got a call from Regina, Thomas's cousin. Regina was apologetic for not reaching out sooner. "I've been avoiding family drama," she said, "but I just wanted to congratulate you on standing up to him. You did what many of us never had the courage to do." Althea thanked her sincerely and expressed her gratitude for the documents Regina had shared. Regina admitted it had been her own quiet protest, having seen how Thomas and his father hurt people for profit. Regina also mentioned that some of Thomas's relatives were furious about the ruling, claiming Althea had embarrassed the family. But Regina no longer cared about their opinions. She said, "If you ever need anything, call me. I'm proud of you." Althea felt a warmth spread in her chest. She had gained an ally from the most unexpected place. It reminded her that not everyone in Thomas's world was heartless. Sometimes it just took one brave person to come forward with the truth. Over the next few weeks, Althea settled into a new normal. She checked her separate bank account and saw the settlement money had arrived. Part of her still felt uneasy accepting it. But Sharon had assured her it was rightful compensation for what she endured and for the years of marriage she invested in good faith. Althea used some of it to pay for improvements at the community center, like fixing the roof and adding more computers for the kids. She did it anonymously, not wanting the attention on herself. She also enrolled in more classes, thinking she might major in social work. She wanted to turn her pain into a purpose, to help others break free from abusive or unequal relationships. The center's director offered her a chance to coordinate a new program focusing on women's empowerment. She gladly accepted, eager to share her experiences in a constructive way. Sometimes, late at night, she would recall the moment Thomas flung those divorce papers across the table, expecting her to beg. She would remember the humiliations, the racist jokes, the isolation. Those memories hurt, but they also reminded her of how far she had come. She was no longer that scared woman waiting for him to change. She had found her own strength and identity outside of his shadow. Then came a letter in the mail that nearly made her heart stop. It was from Thomas. The envelope felt heavy, as if it carried a threat. She opened it carefully, her hands unsteady. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "Althea," it began. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to offer a final word. Everything is messed up now. I lost a lot of deals because of the trial, and some people view me differently. I still don't believe I was entirely wrong, but I can't deny the court's decision. If I could do things over, maybe I would have handled it better. But what's done is done. Don't think this is an apology. It's more of an acknowledgement that you won. I hope you're happy now. Thomas." Althea read it twice. She felt no joy in his words, only sadness. It was clear he was not truly remorseful, just angry at his losses. She placed the letter in a drawer, unsure what to do with it. She realized that sometimes closure does not come with a heartfelt apology. Sometimes it comes with accepting that the other person will never change or see things the way you do, and that was okay. She had her life to live, free from his control. Months passed, and Althea continued her journey. She found a rhythm: work at the community center, attend her classes, and spend weekends enjoying simple pleasures like strolls in the park or quiet reading sessions. She also connected with a counselor who helped her navigate the emotional scars left by Thomas. She began speaking at small events, sharing her story with women's groups, especially those reaching out to Black communities. She talked about financial independence, about recognizing the warning signs of emotional abuse, and about challenging racism in intimate relationships. People responded with tears, applause, and gratitude. She realized her words carried weight because she had lived the pain herself. Over time, she smiled more. She laughed with the kids at the center. She felt a sense of belonging in this new community. She was not the lonely woman in the penthouse anymore. She had built a support system based on mutual respect, understanding, and shared hopes. One particular evening, the community center hosted a large dinner to celebrate new programs and to honor volunteers. Althea was one of the speakers. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair styled naturally. As she stood at the podium, she glanced around at the many faces smiling up at her. Children, volunteers, donors, friends. This was a room of warmth, of people who genuinely cared about each other. She spoke about her journey, being careful not to dwell too much on the trauma. Instead, she focused on the message of strength and self-worth. "No matter where you come from," she said, her voice steady, "no matter what challenges you face, you have the right to stand tall. You have the right to demand respect. And you have the right to walk away from those who refuse to give it." As she finished, the room erupted in applause. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she was smiling. She thought of her mother, who would have been so proud to see her like this. She thought of the night Thomas had slammed the divorce papers in front of her, believing she would crumble. She realized how wrong he had been. After the dinner, some of the teens she mentored gathered around her. They asked if she was ever scared when facing someone as powerful as Thomas. She took a moment before replying, "Yes, I was scared. But I was also more scared of losing myself if I gave in." She then told them that fear was normal, but letting it stop you from doing what is right would keep you trapped forever. They thanked her, saying she was the bravest person they knew. Althea felt humbled, explaining that bravery is doing the right thing even when you feel fear. She hugged them, promising to help them in whatever way she could as they pursued their own dreams. Back in her apartment, Althea poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. She remembered how 5 years ago, city lights represented a life she never thought she'd have, a life of wealth and comfort with Thomas. Now they represented something different. Her own path, her new chance. She felt at peace. She had won in court, but more importantly, she had won back her dignity. She no longer worried about Thomas's next move, or about whether society would judge her. She had discovered a deeper truth. Self-worth does not come from material things or from another person's approval. It comes from living in alignment with who you truly are. For the first time in many years, she felt genuine hope, not the fragile hope she once clung to when she married Thomas, but a hope rooted in her own strength. She sipped her tea and whispered a quiet thank you to her mother, to the supportive people around her, and to herself for not giving up. A few months later, an unexpected letter arrived. It bore the logo of a major philanthropic foundation known for supporting underprivileged communities. Althea opened it, reading the words with disbelief. They had decided to award a large grant in her name, to honor her advocacy and to support the community center's work. Part of the grant would fund nationwide expansion of mentorship programs for Black youth, something Althea had dreamed about but never imagined would happen so soon. She was invited to an award ceremony where she would be recognized for her contributions. Her mind raced. She was just a once poor girl who had stumbled into a billionaire's life, only to face racism and heartbreak. Yet here she was, not only surviving but making a real difference. On the night of the ceremony, she stood on the stage in front of a packed auditorium. Her hands shook slightly as the host praised her achievements and her courage. Applause thundered across the room. In that moment, she spotted a familiar figure lurking at the back. It was Thomas. He watched from a distance, his face blank. She caught his eye for a brief second. It was as if time froze. There was the man who had once thrown those papers at her feet, expecting her to beg for mercy. Yet here she was, receiving a grant in her own name, recognized for her strength and her work to uplift others. She turned back to the podium, her heart beat steady. She thought, he gave me divorce papers, expecting me to crumble. But I built a new life that doesn't revolve around his power or his wealth. As the ceremony ended, she glanced back again. Thomas was gone. She did not know why he came or what he felt. Maybe he was there to see if she would fail. Maybe he was there out of curiosity or regret. But it did not matter. His shadow no longer shaped her destiny. She had discovered a joy and a purpose bigger than he could ever crush. The applause grew louder, and the host led her off the stage. People came forward to shake her hand, share their admiration, and offer their help for future projects. In that electrifying moment, Althea felt the fullness of her life blossom in front of her. The fear and pain were still part of her story, but they were no longer chains around her spirit. She had reclaimed her voice, her pride, her freedom. That was what she did next, and it shocked everyone who thought she would plead for mercy. Instead of begging, she rose higher than anyone expected. And in doing so, she changed not only her own life, but the lives of many who saw her journey as a beacon of hope. Hey everyone! I just wanted to take a moment to say a huge thank you for helping us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to me, and I'm incredibly grateful for every like, comment, and share. This is only the beginning. Let's keep growing this amazing community together, so if you haven't already, please subscribe, drop a like, and leave a comment. Thank you once again for all the love and support. More great content is on the way.